Most people are afraid of strangers. Someone in a dark parking lot. Someone following you on a quiet street. Someone you have never seen before. But there is a different kind of fear that feels much worse. The kind that lives close enough to know your schedule, close enough to hear your door open, close enough to notice when your lights turn off. A bad neighbor is not just someone outside your life. They are beside it, below it, across from it, sometimes only one wall away. These are three scary neighbor stories. Names and details have been changed. Story 1. The neighbor who heard her breathing. When Lena moved into the apartment, she thought the place was perfect. It was small, but clean. Third floor, corner unit, laundry in the basement, a grocery store across the street, and best of all, the rent was just low enough that she could afford to live alone. The building itself was old, not falling apart exactly, just old in the way older apartment buildings always are. Painted radiators, thin doors, uneven floors, pipes that knocked in the walls at night. The landlord told her the building had been converted from an old boarding house decades earlier, so some of the layouts were strange. Closets were in odd places. The bathroom had a tiny vent near the ceiling that didn't seem connected to anything. And inside the hallway, between the apartments, there were locked utility doors that tenants weren't allowed to open. Lena didn't think much of it. She was just happy to have her own place. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened. She went to work, came home, cooked simple dinners, watched shows on her laptop. Sometimes she heard the neighbor below her moving around late at night, but it never seemed serious. Then one evening, someone knocked on her door. It was around 10:15 p.m. Lena looked through the peephole and saw a man standing in the hallway. He was older, maybe late 50s, thin gray hair, dark cardigan, one hand resting against the doorframe like he had been standing there for a while. Lena kept the chain on and opened the door a few inches. The man gave her a polite smile. "Hi, I'm Mr. Harlan. I live right below you." Lena smiled back. "Nice to meet you." He nodded, but he didn't leave. He looked past her shoulder into the apartment. Then he said, "Just wanted to ask if you could keep it down a little at night." Lena blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry. Was I loud?" "Last night," he said, "around 1. Lena thought about it. She had gone to bed before midnight. "I was asleep by then." Mr. Harlan's smile didn't change. He said, "Maybe it was the television." "I don't have a TV." That made him pause, only for a second. Then he nodded. "Right. Well, maybe just be careful with the floors. These old buildings carry sound." Lena apologized again, and he left. It was uncomfortable, but not strange enough to scare her. People in old buildings complained about noise. That was normal. 3 nights later, he came back. This time, it was 11:40 p.m. Lena had just brushed her teeth. She was standing in the kitchen, filling a glass of water, when the knock came. Slow. 3 taps. She looked through the peephole. Mr. Harlan again. She opened the door with the chain still on. His face looked tired, almost irritated. He said, "Could you please stop dragging furniture?" Lena stared at him. I'm not dragging furniture. I heard it. I haven't moved anything. It went from the bedroom to the kitchen. Lena turned and looked behind her. Her apartment was quiet. Her chair was tucked under the table. Her bed was untouched. Nothing had moved. She said, maybe it was someone else. His eyes narrowed slightly. You're the only one above me. Lena didn't know what to say. He looked past her again. This time, his eyes moved slowly around the apartment, like he was trying to confirm something. Then he said, I can hear more than you think. That was the first time Lena felt something wrong. Not annoyed, wrong. She closed the door and locked both locks. That night, she slept badly. Every pipe sound made her open her eyes. Every knock from the radiator sounded like someone shifting behind the wall. The next morning, she emailed the landlord. She kept it simple. Downstairs neighbor complaining about noises I'm not making. Landlord replied a few hours later. Old building. Sound travels strangely. Let me know if it continues. It continued. Over the next week, Mr. Harlan complained 3 more times. Once about footsteps. Once about talking. Once about music. Lena had not played music once in the apartment. She started documenting everything. What time she went to bed. What time she left. What time he knocked. She even took videos at night, slowly filming her silent apartment. At first, she thought she was doing it for proof. Then she realized she was doing it because she was starting to feel like she was being watched. The next incident happened on a Thursday. Lena came home late from work. She was exhausted. She took off her shoes at the door, made tea, and called her sister. They talked for maybe 20 minutes. Nothing important. Work stress, groceries, their mother's birthday. Lena laughed at something her sister said. Then she lowered her voice, because it was late. The next morning, there was an envelope slipped under her door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The message was written in careful block letters. Please stop laughing after 10 p.m. Lena stood in the hallway for almost a full minute, staring at it. She had not laughed loudly. Her windows had been closed. The bedroom wall did not connect to any other unit. And Mr. Harlan lived below her, not beside her. She took the note to the landlord. This time, the landlord seemed concerned. He told her he would speak to Mr. Harlan. Lena asked if the walls were really that thin. The landlord said, "Not that thin." That should have made her feel better. It didn't. That night, Lena didn't call anyone. She didn't watch anything. She didn't even cook. She just sat on the bed with her laptop open, headphones in, pretending to read while listening to the apartment. At 12:18 a.m., she heard something. Not below her, not above her. Behind the bathroom wall, a faint scrape, like fabric brushing against wood. Lena froze. The sound stopped. She pulled out one earbud. The apartment was silent. Then it came again. A tiny shift, then a click. Lena stood up slowly. Her bathroom door was open. The lights were off. The small vent near the ceiling looked exactly the same as it always had. A metal rectangle painted white, dust on the edges, Nothing unusual. She stepped closer. The apartment was so quiet, she could hear her own breathing. Then, from somewhere behind the wall, something breathed back. Lena didn't scream. She couldn't. She backed out of the bathroom, grabbed her phone, and left the apartment barefoot. She called the landlord from the stairwell. Then, she called the police. When everyone arrived, Mr. Harlan opened his door downstairs looking confused. He acted offended when Lena said she heard something behind her bathroom wall. He said the building was old. He said she was imagining things. He said maybe she was making the noise herself and blaming him. Then one of the officers asked the landlord about the locked utility doors in the hallway. The landlord hesitated. He said most of them were sealed, old access spaces from before the renovation. The officer asked for the key. The utility door nearest Lena's apartment had not been opened in years. At least, that's what the landlord said. But when he unlocked it, the inside told a different story. The dust on the floor had been disturbed. There were narrow crawl boards along the wall, old pipes, electrical wiring, and a space barely wide enough for a person to move sideways. An officer shined his flashlight in. The beam caught something silver, a small audio recorder. It had been taped to the back of Lena's bathroom vent. Beside it was a cheap wireless baby monitor, fresh batteries, a coil of cable, and a folded piece of paper. The paper had dates on it, times, notes, not just complaints, observations. Home 6:42. Shower 7:11. Phone call 9:56. Laughing. Bedroom light off 12:03. Lena felt like the hallway tilted. Mr. Harlan said nothing. He just stood in his doorway, staring at the floor. Police searched his apartment next. They found a matching monitor receiver on a shelf beside his bed. They also found copies of maintenance keys he should not have had. Later, Lena learned that Mr. Harlan had lived in the building for 22 years. He knew which utility doors stuck, which vents connected, which walls had been left hollow during the renovation. He told police he was only trying to prove she was noisy, but Lena never believed that. Because after she moved out, the landlord mailed her the rest of the items police had cleared from the access space. Inside the evidence bag was one more thing, a small notebook. On the first page, Mr. Harlan had written a sentence that still made her feel sick. She breathes louder when she knows I'm listening. Story 2. The house across the street. Daniel noticed the porch light on his third night in the neighborhood. He had moved into a small rental house on a quiet suburban street. Nothing fancy. Single-story homes, driveways, trimmed lawns. A few porch flags. The kind of place where everything felt normal, because everything looked normal. Across the street lived an elderly woman named Mrs. Keller. At least, that was what the neighbor on the left told him. "She's harmless," the neighbor said. "Been here forever. Keeps to herself." Daniel saw her once on moving day. She was standing behind the screen door of the house across the street. White hair, floral housecoat, one hand against the door. She didn't wave. She just watched. Daniel lifted his hand anyway. She slowly closed the inner door. He thought it was funny at the time. A little creepy, maybe, but harmless. On the third night, Daniel woke up at 2:17 a.m. He knew the exact time because his phone was face up on the nightstand. The room was dark except for a pale rectangle of light on his ceiling. At first, he thought a car had pulled into his driveway. Then, he saw the light was not moving. He got up and looked through the blinds. Mrs. Keller's porch light was on. It was unusually bright, a hard white LED light that washed over the front of her house and spilled across the street. Daniel watched for a few seconds. Nothing happened. No one came out. No car arrived. After a minute, the porch light turned off. Daniel went back to bed. The next night, it happened again. 2:17 a.m. Same white light, same quiet street. This time, Daniel stayed by the window longer. He watched the Keller house. The curtains were closed. The driveway was empty. The porch was empty. At 2:20 a.m., the light turned off. By the fourth night, Daniel was curious enough to set an alarm. 2:15 a.m. He woke before the light came on. He stood beside the window in darkness and waited. At exactly 2:17, Mrs. Keller's porch light snapped on. Daniel whispered, "That is weird." Then he noticed something else. A figure moved behind the living room curtain. Not Mrs. Keller. Too tall, too fast. The shape crossed from left to right and vanished. Daniel leaned closer to the blinds. His heartbeat picked up. The light turned off at 2:20. The house went dark. The next morning, Daniel saw Mrs. Keller collecting mail. He walked across the street, trying to sound casual. "Hi, Mrs. Keller?" She looked up sharply. Up close, she looked smaller than he expected. Fragile. Her hands trembled around the stack of envelopes. Daniel introduced himself. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You're in the blue house." He smiled. "Yeah, just moved in." She didn't smile back. Daniel hesitated, then asked, "Do you have someone staying with you?" Mrs. Keller's expression changed. Not fear exactly. Something guarded. "No. I thought I saw someone last night." "No," she said again. "I live alone." Then she turned and went inside. Daniel told himself to let it go. Maybe he had imagined the figure. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe Mrs. Keller had a caregiver she didn't want to talk about. But that night, the porch light came on again. 2:17. This time, the light seemed brighter. Daniel stood at his window with the room completely dark. He saw no figure, no movement. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message said, "Close your blinds." Daniel stopped breathing for a second. He looked at the screen, then at the house across the street. Every curtain in Mrs. Keller's house was still closed. He typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. He called the number. Disconnected. Daniel closed his blinds. Then he stood behind them for 10 minutes, looking through the tiny gap between the slats. At 2:20, the porch light turned off. The next day, Daniel bought a small security camera. He mounted it inside his front window, aimed across the street. He felt ridiculous doing it, like he was becoming the strange neighbor. But when night came, He was glad it was there. 2:17 a.m. The porch light turned on. On the camera feed, Daniel saw the Keller house clearly. Porch, front door, living room window. Nothing moved. Then, at 2:18, something stepped into the edge of the frame. Not from the house, from the side yard. A tall figure moved along the fence line and stopped near Mrs. Keller's garbage bins. The person stood completely still, facing Daniel's house. Then they lifted one hand and pointed directly at his bedroom window. Daniel backed away from the blinds. His mouth went dry. He called the police. By the time officers arrived, the figure was gone. They knocked on Mrs. Keller's door. She answered wrapped in a robe, confused and angry. She told them she lived alone. She told them she had not been outside. She told them she did not know why her porch light kept turning on, because she never used it. One officer checked the light switch by her front door. It was off. Daniel saw the officer's expression change. The porch light was not being controlled from inside the house. The next morning, Mrs. Keller's nephew arrived. His name was Paul. He was in his 30s, with a shaved head and a work van. Daniel watched him park in the driveway and speak to the police. Paul told them he came by sometimes to help with repairs. He said the porch light was probably faulty. He said his aunt was confused. Old wiring, old house. Simple explanation. But Daniel noticed something about Paul's van. A ladder. Security cameras. Motion lights. Electrical tools. That night, Daniel did not sleep in his bedroom. He slept on the couch, fully dressed, with every light off. At 2:17 a.m., the porch light turned on. Not across the street. Outside Daniel's own house. His front porch exploded with white light. Daniel sat upright. He had not installed that light. He had never seen it turn on before. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message said, "Better." Daniel grabbed his keys and left through the back door. He went to a 24-hour diner and waited until sunrise. When he came home, there was an envelope taped to his front door. Inside was a photograph, black and white, printed on cheap paper. It showed Daniel standing in his bedroom window the night before. The photo had been taken from across the street. On the bottom, written in marker, were 3 words, "You watch too." That was enough. Daniel took everything to the police. This time, they searched the outside of Mrs. Keller's house. Behind the porch light, hidden inside the housing, they found a tiny wireless camera. Its lens had been aimed directly at Daniel's bedroom. The light was not just a light. It was cover. When it turned on, the camera got a perfect view through the blinds. The signal led to a receiver in Mrs. Keller's detached garage. The garage had been locked for months, according to Mrs. Keller. She thought it was full of old furniture. It wasn't. Inside, police found a folding chair, a sleeping bag, a space heater, a cooler, printed photos of houses on the street, and a handwritten list of times when different neighbors turned lights on and off. Paul was arrested 2 days later. He admitted he had been using the garage without his aunt knowing. He claimed he was only checking on the neighborhood. He said people were careless. He said someone had to watch. Daniel moved out before the lease ended. The landlord kept part of the deposit. Daniel didn't care. Months later, he heard from the neighbor who originally told him Mrs. Keller was harmless. Mrs. Keller had moved into assisted living. The house across the street was sold. The new owners replaced the porch light. But Daniel said that for a long time afterward, he still woke up at 2:17 a.m. Not because of a light, because his body remembered the exact minute someone used darkness to watch him. Story 3. The fence camera. Priya and Evan bought their first house in early spring. It was small, but it was theirs. 2 bedrooms, a narrow backyard, wooden fence, a kitchen window that looked out toward a row of hedges. The neighbor on the right introduced himself the day they moved in. His name was Mark. He was friendly in an intense way, too helpful. He offered tools. He offered moving advice. He told them which garbage bin went out on which day before they had even asked. At first, Priya thought he was just lonely. Evan thought he was harmless. Then small things started happening in the backyard. A chair turned around. The gate left unlatched. A planter moved from one side of the patio to the other. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. Just slightly wrong. Evan said it was probably wind. Priya said wind didn't turn a chair to face the kitchen window. The first real argument they had in the house was about the backyard. Priya wanted to install a camera. Evan thought that would make them look paranoid. Then, one Saturday morning, they found muddy footprints near the back steps. The prints did not come from their door. They came from the fence, across the patio, to the kitchen window, and back again. Evan bought the camera that afternoon. Before he installed it, Mark came over. He leaned on the fence and smiled. "Everything okay?" Evan looked up from the ladder. "Yeah, just putting in a camera." Mark's smile stayed in place. "A camera?" "Backyard camera." Mark looked toward the kitchen window, then back at Evan. "You really don't need that around here." Priya was standing inside the kitchen when he said it. She remembered the way he said "around here." Not like he meant the neighborhood, like he meant his own yard. That night, the new camera recorded nothing. The night after that, nothing. For almost a week, the backyard stayed normal. Then, on Thursday, Priya came home early from work. She entered through the back door because she had been gardening that morning and forgot to lock it. When she stepped into the kitchen, she saw something that made her stop. The blinds above the sink were open. She always kept them half closed. Always. Because the window faced Mark's side of the fence. She checked the house. Nothing missing. No broken window. No open door. Just the blinds. Moved. Evan said maybe he had opened them and forgotten. Priya said he hadn't. They checked the backyard camera. At 1:12 p.m., while both of them were gone, the footage cut out. Not a glitch. Not a bad signal. The camera went black for 23 minutes, then came back. When it came back, the blinds were already open. Evan stopped arguing after that. He called the police non-emergency line. They told him to check locks, save footage, and call again if anything else happened. Something else happened 2 nights later. Priya woke up around 3 a.m. to a soft tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. Not at the bedroom window, at the kitchen window. Evan was still asleep. Priya got out of bed and walked slowly down the hallway. The kitchen was dark. Moonlight came through the blinds. Tap, tap, tap. She reached for the light switch. Then she noticed something outside, a small red dot near the fence. It vanished the moment she turned on the kitchen light. Evan came in behind her, half awake. "What is it?" Priya pointed. "There was a light." They went outside with flashlights. At first, they found nothing. Then Evan noticed the birdhouse. It was mounted on Mark's side of the fence, angled toward their yard. They had seen it before, but never thought about it. It looked decorative, weathered wood, tiny round opening, too small for most birds. Evan stood on a patio chair and shined his flashlight into the hole. Inside was a camera lens. The birdhouse was fake. The next morning they called police. Mark came outside while the officer was still in the yard. He looked annoyed, not nervous. When the officer asked about the birdhouse, Mark said it was for security. He said there had been break-ins. He said it pointed at his own property. The officer asked why it was aimed directly at Priya and Evan's kitchen window. Mark said, "They shouldn't have anything to hide." No one spoke for a second. Then, the officer removed the camera. Mark objected, loudly. He said it was his fence, his property, his right. But when the officer checked the angle, there was no question. The camera had been positioned to see through the gap in Priya and Evan's blinds. Police took the memory card. Priya expected to feel better. She didn't, because Mark did not look ashamed. He looked angry that he had been interrupted. That night, Priya and Evan stayed at a hotel. The next morning, an officer called and asked them to come to the station. He said they needed to see something. The memory card had weeks of footage. Their patio, their kitchen window, Priya watering plants, Evan making coffee, them eating dinner, them turning lights on and off. But that was not the worst part. There were folders on the card. One folder was labeled with dates. Another was labeled kitchen. Inside were video files that had not come from the birdhouse. The angle was wrong. The footage showed the inside of their kitchen from the counter. Priya nearly dropped the tablet when she saw it. The camera had been inside the house. The officer paused the video and pointed to the corner of the frame. A digital clock, small, black, sitting near the coffee maker. Priya recognized it immediately. Mark had given it to them during the first week, a housewarming gift. He said he had an extra one. He said everyone needed a kitchen clock. Inside the clock, investigators found a second camera, Wi-Fi enabled, motion activated. The outages on their backyard camera had not been accidents. Someone had been jamming the signal long enough to enter the yard and adjust the devices. The open blinds, the moved chair, the unlocked gate. All of it had been part of the same pattern. Mark denied entering the house. Then police found a copy of their back door key in his garage. Evan remembered leaving their keys on the kitchen counter the day Mark came over to help with a loose cabinet hinge. It must have taken him only seconds to press the key into soft material. Seconds. That was all he needed. After the arrest, neighbors came forward, not all at once, quietly. One said Mark had complained about new people changing the neighborhood. Another said he had cameras facing their driveway. Another said he always seemed to know when packages arrived before delivery notifications came through. Priya and Evan sold the house less than 6 months later. They lost money. They didn't care. Before they left, Priya threw the digital clock in a trash bag and handed it to police. She never wanted to see it again. But she said the thing that stayed with her was not the camera, not the fake birdhouse, not even the copied key. It was the fact that Mark had introduced himself on the first day, smiling, helpful, friendly, already deciding where he would watch from. Most scary neighbor stories do not begin with screaming. They begin with small details you explain away. A light turning on, a complaint that feels too specific, a gate left open, a person who knows your routine before they should. And that is what makes them so frightening. Because a stranger can disappear, a bad neighbor stays. They learn your habits. They memorize your windows. They know when you leave. And sometimes, by the time you realize they have been watching, they already know you noticed. That was the missing chapter. Comment which story disturbed you the most. 1, 2, or 3.